Hello, my name is Matt Burns. I'm from the University of Missouri, and today we're going to talk about school psychologists and the role of core instruction within RTI framework. Hopefully you'll understand at the end of this that without Tier 1, without good core instruction, nothing else matters, and that school psychologists can play a role in that. I'm going to break this up into a couple different sections. I'm going to talk about PLCs, professional learning communities, and the role of school psychologists in those. I'm going to talk about identifying a class-wide need and showing a Tier 1 intervention for math, and then showing a Tier 1 intervention for reading. So starting with a conversation about core instruction to begin with. So we think about core instruction, you go back to what Hattie in his fabulous book called Visible Learning, which I highly recommend people get. He talks about effect sizes. Now, an effect size here, because this is an effect size based on several meta-analyses. So these effect sizes are a standard deviation unit for hundreds of studies. It combines hundreds of studies into one basic number. And generally speaking, 0.5 is a moderate effect or so. And 0.2 or so is kind of weak. So when you look at contributions to learning, what the student brings to the table has a moderate effect, 0.4. What the school brings to the table has a moderate or small effect, about 0.23. Still matters, but small. But the teacher is 0.49 and the curriculum is 0.45. So the school is things like class size, color of the walls, that kind of stuff, arranging the seats, etc. So those matter, but not very much. Whereas how good the teacher is and how effective the curriculum is does matter quite a bit. And both of those matter more than what the student brings to the table. So what the teacher does and what the curriculum involves matters more than things like working memory, etc. And to implement an effective core instructional practice, we use a 3-tiered model, which I'm sure people don't need me to explain. And I'm just going to do this to cut to the chase, which basically all we're trying to do in an RTI framework, and I say this in probably every video you'll watch, is answer 3 questions. Number 1, is there a class-wide need? Is it specific to the problem or the individual? Is there a class-wide need? The primary problem analysis question for Tier 2 is, what's the category of the problem? And then finally at Tier 3 is, what's the causal variable? What's that individual variable that's most closely related to the problem? What's the environmental variable that's most closely related to the problem that we can then manipulate to solve the problem? So that's it, 3 questions. Is there a class-wide need? What's the category of the problem? What's the causal variable? In other videos, I talk about category of the problem and causal variable. Today, we're talking about class-wide need. And in Tier 1, of course, good quality core instruction, it starts with a good PLC. A grade level team, a department meeting, however it works at your school. It might be all the 3rd grade teachers get together. It might be at a high school, all the ELA teachers get together. At some point in time throughout the week, usually, hopefully it's once a week or every other week, the teams get together and they look at data. After universal screening data are collected 3 times a year, so in September, January, and May, after those data are collected, teams sit down, look at the data, and try to answer these 5 questions. Is there a class-wide need? Who needs Tier 2? Do we miss anyone? What should we do for Tier 2? And should we go to Tier 3? As I mentioned, these teams meet hopefully once a week, but certainly no less than every other week. And what we advocate is that they have different focus every week. That the 2 times a month, they just focus on whatever content the PLC is going to focus on. Once a month, they've got to focus on core instruction in the area in which the RTI model is occurring. So if it's a math RTI model, they got to look at math core instruction once a month. If it's literacy, got to look at literacy once a month. If it's both, you got to look at both once a month. But then once a month, we also have the team look at the data. That's at PLC 4th weekly meeting of the month down here at the bottom. The order of this doesn't matter. So once a month, the team looks at the data. So in September, January, and May, they look at those data for those screening data. And the rest of the time, they look at the progress monitoring data to decide if the kids are making sufficient progress. I advocate for the professional learning communities to be the ones to look at those data. The PLCs are the ones that make the decisions. When I work in a school, the First question I ask teachers, if the principal calls me and says, will you help us start an RTI model? I ask a few questions to start with. I ask, what's your universal screener? I ask to tell me about your core instruction in reading or math. And I ask to tell me about your PLC model at the elementary school, the department team, discipline team, however it works at the secondary schools. PLCs are a group of teachers. They meet to look at data, collaborate, focus on results to enhance student learning. And we all know this, the DeFores have written about this extensively and quite nicely, I might add. What do we want to know? What do we want each student to learn? How we know when each student has learned it? How we respond when a student experiences difficulty in learning. Here at the University of Missouri, the wonderful PLC group here put together a rubric so they can work with schools all across the state. And the rubric was designed to address 8 areas. So they work with schools all over the state to develop their PLC, and they rate these 8 areas as deep, proficient, partial, or minimal, and give the PLCs feedback on how they're doing. So each strand has 4 to 7 subcomponents, or 46 total items, and 4 implementation levels, as I mentioned, deep, proficient, partial, or minimal. The Missouri PLC consultants would go out during the 3rd year of implementation. They do continuous support and feedback, but during the 3rd year, they went out and did this rubric again. And we took those data to do some analyses. So we collected the data in the spring, and it consisted of each one was, again, minimal to deep for each subcomponent. Here's what we found. I'm going to talk about this in more detail in a second, but what we found was across these 8 areas, that, remember, this is a score of 1 to 4. So they scored pretty well. They scored a little low on some areas, but I want to show you that the internal consistency for every area was pretty good, 0.86 or higher. Now, again, this is someone going out, observing the PLC, completing this rubric, and using the rubric to give them feedback. So we want to look to see, does the 8-factor structure hold up from the 46 indicators? So we did a confirmatory factor analysis, and you can see we saw the chi-squared was significant, which isn't really this large of an N. We had almost 1,000 schools. With this large of an N, you're going to see significant chi-squared, but the RMSEA was pretty good, 0.06. You want 0.08 or lower. But the CFI and the TFI were both too low, and the SRMR is at 0.05. So 3 of the indices suggested it wasn't a good fit, and 2 suggested it was an acceptable fit. So we decided to do exploratory factor analysis, and what we found was 2 factors really explained the data better than any other way. 2 factors. We labeled them collaborative leadership processes and data-driven systems of learning. So really, a good, effective PLC comes down to those 2 things. Is there a collaborative leadership process, and are there data-driven systems of learning? We then used the CFA to confirm the factor structure. So we did exploratory factor analysis, took half the data, and did a CFA with those. And now we see, again, the chi-squared was significant, but that large of an N, that's going to happen every time. But the RMSEA was below 0.08, the CFI above 0.95, TFI above 0.95, etc. So the factor structure seemed to fit. We then correlated the 8 areas with 8 areas plus our 2 new factors with the state tests for ELA, basically, and the state test for math. You see the correlations are roughly 0.2 for reading, a little less, some of them were quite small, but they were all significant except 1 for math. And the 2 major factors we found correlated with reading at 0.21, 0.15, with math at 0.32, 0.30. So not bad. And now we go back and look to see which ones do they tend to score low in. Well, the schools tend to score low on assessment of learning, systematic process for intervention, and process for continuous improvement. They scored the highest on leadership and the highest on foundation to learning community culture. So they had good cultures, etc., but they needed to really work on more assessment and systems for intervention. And we look at just the 2 factors, collaborative leadership process and data-driven systems of learning. The data-driven systems of learning was significantly lower with a moderate effect, 0.72. So again, PLCs seem to do a better job of having processes in place, but they don't do as good a job in using data to actually drive what they do. Hopefully, if you're a school psychologist watching this, that's piquing your interest, because now you realize that's what we do and that's what we can bring to the table. So June Priest, who's now an assistant professor at the University of Alabama, did a really great study looking at, and this was published in the Journal of Educational and Psychological Consultation, looking at how a school psychologist can work with PLCs to make them more effective. And again, looking at particular areas from the rubric, she wanted to see, this is the pre-mean and post-mean for these 4 strands. Strand number 4, how effective teams work, and these are the individual items of them. And you can see that what she would do, she'd go out and meet with them once a week and give them feedback on how they're implementing these processes. All she would do is just give them feedback. You can see doing that, we saw a nice increase. Pretty much most of the items went up pretty well. This one started high, this wasn't too bad. This one started high at 3 and stayed at 3, but all the rest of them went from quite low to at or above a 3. And you can see in an A-B design that looked pretty good. Those data graphed. She did this over multiple weeks. So each data point here is the total score of these items across time. So here's week 1 was about, their total score is about 20. Week 2, week 3, week 4. Then after she started the feedback, she consistently got them above 20. Some schools worked on strand number 5. One school worked on strand number 5, what students need to know and do. So now again, that was broken up into 4 items. And again, you see nice jumps after she started meeting with them and giving them feedback. And again, with an A-B design, except for one data point, we saw a nice increase in level, an immediate increase in level. And then this one was strand 6, assessment for or of learning, was the one this school chose to work on. And again, you can see with some consultation, she got them a little bit, still not quite as high, not at a 3, but much higher than it was. And again, the data looked nice in a simple A-B design. So what does a school psychologist bring to the table in talking about PLCs? Well, without a good PLC, it's really difficult to implement an effective tier 1, and certainly PLC is critical to an effective RTI model. So a school psychologist could consult with professional learning communities to help them, give them feedback on how they're operating using something like the rubric that we've developed, which is again published in the Journal of Educational and Psychological Consultation, and give them feedback on their processes and help them improve how they run. We'll stop there now and talk again about interventions at tier 1.